Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Allan Kellehear. I'm the Professor in Health and Social Care at Northumbria University in Newcastle, the Newcastle in the north of England, not the Newcastle in Australia. And I've been invited here today very quickly to welcome you and to congratulate Compassionate Communities Australia on a wonderful achievement. We're launching it today, and that's a wonderful thing. I'd like to start with a joke that Sigmund Freud once told about a man who wrote a letter to his wife. And in that letter, he said, "Darling, if one of us should die before the other, I think I shall move to Paris." He was right and he was wrong. He was right in the sense that Freud wanted to convey the idea that no one can seem to imagine their own death. Death and dying always occurs to someone else. And he's right. It does occur to someone else usually. But the issue is it usually occurs to your father or your mother or your daughter or your son or your spouse or your best friend or your co-worker. Funnily enough, it doesn't occur anonymously out there. It occurs to other people often enough, for sure, but for people you love and hold dear. That's the first way in which that joke was right. But it was also wrong because you will eventually die. You will eventually probably accumulate at least one, if not several, illnesses that are life-threatening or life-limiting as you get older. At the end of the day, that's why we need compassionate communities. That's why we need compassionate communities. Because we spend less than 5% of our time as people who are grieving or as people who are caregiving or as people who are living with life-limiting illnesses or living with advanced age. We spend less than 5% of our time in front of professional people, in front of doctors or nurses, even volunteers. 95% of the time we spend with our families and with our friends and with our co-workers and with our neighbours and with our churchgoers and the people who we attend temple with or the local mosque with. And that's what compassionate communities are about. It's occupying that 95% of that time where we need each other's support, where we need that conversation, where we need that cup of tea and a biscuit, when we need our dogs and our friends. Compassionate communities is fantastic that way. And it is now a worldwide movement. It started 20 years ago. Many people have forgotten that it actually started in Australia by me, by my palliative care unit at La Trobe University in Melbourne. We wrote the first articles and the first books on this subject. And since then, it has blossomed worldwide. There are compassionate communities in Japan and in India and Taiwan and in Western Europe and in North America and Canada and the United States and in England and Scotland. It's become an amazing development where people believe and are committed to the idea that not only is health everybody's responsibility, that everybody has a role to play, but also end-of-life care. End-of-life care is everybody's responsibility, and everybody has a role to play. And the development of Compassionate Communities Australia has been and will be an incredibly significant and important international development. That's because we already have an international association for compassionate communities and compassionate cities in the form of Public Health Palliative Care International. Our international body and Compassionate Communities, remember, is part of the overall public health approach to end-of-life care. We also have Compassionate Communities UK, which is an association very similar to Compassionate Communities Australia. And our role in Compassionate Communities UK has been to promote and to support communities, neighbourhoods, workplaces, schools, whole cities in developing the compassionate community approach, the approach that highlights health and well-being, education and information, and social supports. And that's fundamentally what Compassionate Communities is about. It is a major public health approach, a health promotion approach, if you like, to the support of all of us as we grow old and as we die and as we develop our caregiving roles and also as we grieve during our multiple losses, including bereavement. The public health approach and the compassionate communities approach is embodied in organisations like Compassionate Communities Australia. Compassionate Communities Australia will be the pioneering organisation for the development of compassionate communities right across Australia. It is an incredibly important moment in the history of hospice and palliative care in Australia. And it is an incredibly important moment in the history of public health in Australia, because only by integrating dying and caregiving and grief and loss into public health does public health recognise and acknowledge the wholeness of its approach. Before the public health approach, before compassionate communities, public health was a kind of a death-denying development. But now with compassionate communities, public health and palliative care have married, and they're going to produce wonderful children called compassionate communities. And that's a wonderful thing, not only for palliative care in Australia and the rest of the world, but also public health in Australia and the rest of the world. We must always remember that there are limits to what we do as well. And the public health approach, the compassionate communities approach to end-of-life care is not designed, and it was never designed, to replace professional care. Compassionate communities always have partnerships with their professional services, with their doctors, with their nurses, with their social workers, with the chaplains, with the volunteer movement. They complement it and make it whole. They are part of the wider effort to make society better and to have a good life and a good death. George Burns, the American comedian, said on his 99th birthday, he had a press conference, a typical thing for Americans to do, to have a press conference for a birthday. And on his 99th birthday, he held this press conference. And at that press conference, he boasted that every day of his adult life, he smoked 3 or 4 Cuban cigars and drank a large glass of red wine every day of his life. And one of the journalists asked him, "That's an incredible thing that you managed to do that and live to 99. What does your doctor say?" And George Burns replied, "He doesn't say anything. He's dead." There are limits to public health. We try to maximize the conditions under which we have a good life, a healthy life, a life of well-being and a life of friends and family. But it's not perfect. In a way, we have our professional services to help us when things go wrong. But for the majority of time, our quality of life is measured by the quality of our community engagement and support. The support of our friends and our family and our animal companions and our workplaces and our schools. Compassionate Communities Australia will ensure that that light stays on and burns brightly in Australia and beyond. Thank you very much.